So I excused myself on the grounds of pain and fatigue, as I often had over the years when seeing Caitlin or any of my other friends. In truth, it always hurt. It always hurt not to breathe like a normal person, incessantly reminding your lungs to be lungs, forcing yourself to accept as unsolvable the clawing, scraping, inside out act of under oxygenation. So I wasn't lying exactly, I was just choosing among truths. I found a bench surrounded by an Irish gift store, the fountain pen emporium, and a baseball cap outlet. A corner of the mall even Caitlin would never shop and started reading Midnight Dawns. It featured a sentence to corpse ratio of nearly 1 is to 1, and I tore through it without ever looking up. I liked Staff Sergeant Max Mayhem, even though he didn't have much in the way of technical personality, but mostly I liked that his adventures kept happening. There were always more bad guys to kill and more good guys to save. New wars started even before the old ones were on. I hadn't read a real series like that since I was a kid, and it was exciting to live again in an infinite fiction. 20 pages from the end of Midnight Dawns, things started to look pretty bleak for Mayhem when he was shot 17 times while attempting to rescue a blonde American hostage from the enemy. But as a reader, I did not despair. The war effort would go on without him. There could and would be sequels starring his cohorts, Specialist Manny Loco and Private Jasper Jacks and the rest. I was just about to the end when this little girl with barretted braids appeared in front of me and said, "What's in your nose?" And I said, it's called a cannula. These tubes give me oxygen and help me breathe. Her mother swooped in and said, "Jackie," disapprovingly, but I said, "No, no, it's okay," because it totally was. And then Jackie asked, would they help me breathe too? I don't know, let's try. I took it off and let Jackie stick the cannula in her nose and breathe. "Tickles," she said. "I know, right?" "I think I'm breathing better," she said. "Yeah, yeah." I said, "I wish I could give you my cannula, but I kind of really need the help." I already felt the loss. I focused on my breathing as Jackie handed the tubes back to me. I gave them a quick swipe with my t-shirt, laced the tubes behind my ears, and put the Nubians back in place. "Thanks for letting me try it," she said. "No problem, Jackie," her mother said again, and this time I let her go. I returned to the book where Staff Sergeant Max Mayhem was regretting that he had but one life to give for his country. But I kept thinking about that little kid and how much I liked her. The other thing about Caitlin, I guess, was that it could never again feel natural to talk to her. Any attempts to feign normal social interactions were just depressing because it was so glaringly obvious that everyone I spoke to for the rest of my life would feel awkward and self conscious around me, except maybe kids like Jackie who just didn't know any better. Anyway, I really did like being alone. I liked being alone with poor Staff Sergeant Max Mayhem, who, oh, come on, he's not going to survive this 17 bullet ounce, is he? Spoiler alert, he lives. Chapter 4. I went to bed a little early that night, changing into boy boxers and a t-shirt before crawling under the covers of my bed, which was queen size and pillow topped and one of my favorite places in the world. And then I started reading An Imperial Affliction for the millionth time. AIA is about this girl named Anna who narrates the story, and her one-eyed mom who is a professional gardener obsessed with tulips, and they have a normal lower middle class life in a little central California town until Anna gets this rare blood cancer. But it's not a cancer book because cancer books suck. I like in cancer books the cancer person starts a charity that raises money to fight cancer, right? And this commitment to charity reminds the cancer person of the essential goodness of humanity and makes him or her feel loved and encouraged because she or he will leave a cancer curing legacy. But in AIA, Anna decides that being a person with cancer who starts the cancer charity is a bit narcissistic. So she starts a charity called the Anna Foundation for people with cancer who want to cure cholera. Also, Anna is honest about all of it in a way no one else really is. Throughout the book, she refers to herself as the side effect, which is just totally correct. Cancer cures are essentially side effects of the relentless mutation that made the diversity of life on Earth possible. So as the story goes on, she gets sicker. The treatment sends disease racing to kill her, and her mom falls in love with this Dutch tulip trader Anna calls the Dutch tulip man. The Dutch tulip man has lots of money and very eccentric ideas about how to treat cancer, but Anna thinks this guy might be a con man and possibly not even Dutch. And then, just as the possibly Dutch guy and her mom are about to get married, and Anna is about to start this crazy new treatment regimen involving wet grass and low doses of arsenic, the book ends right in the middle of a. I know it's a very, very literary decision and everything, and probably part of the reason I love the book so much. But there is something to recommend a story that ends. And if it can't end, then it should at least continue into perpetuity, like the adventures of Staff Sergeant Max Mayhem's Platoon. Uh, I understood that story ended because Anna died or got too sick to write, and this mid sentence thing was supposed to reflect how life really ends and whatever. But there were characters other than Anna in the story, and it seemed unfair that I would never find out what happened to them. I had written care of his publisher a dozen letters to Peter Van Houten, each asking for some answers or what happens after the end of the story. Whether the Dutch tulip man is a con man, whether Anna's mother ends up married to him, what happens to Anna's stupid hamster which her mom hates, whether Anna's friends graduate from high school, all that stuff. But he had never responded to any of my letters. AIA was the only book Peter Van Houten had written, and all anyone seemed to know about him was that after the book came out, he moved from the United States to the Netherlands and became kind of reclusive. I imagined that he was working on a sequel set in the Netherlands. Maybe Anna's mom and the Dutch tulip man end up moving there and trying to start a new life, but it had been 10 years since an Imperial Affliction came out, and Van Houten hadn't published so much as a blog post. I couldn't wait forever. As I read it that night, I kept getting distracted imagining Augustus Waters reading the same words. I wonder if he had liked it or if he had dismissed it as pretentious. Then I remembered my promise to call him after reading The Price of Dawn. So I found his number on its title page and texted him, Price of Dawn review, too many bodies, not enough adjectives, how is AIA? He replied a minute later, as I recall, you promised to call when you finished the book, not text. So I called. As I recall, you promised to call when you finish the book, not text. So I called Hazel Grace. He said upon picking up. So have you read it? Well, I haven't finished it. It's 651 pages long, and I have had 24 hours. How far are you? 453. And I will withhold judgment until I finish. However, I will say that I'm feeling a bit embarrassed to have given you the price of dawn. Don't be. I'm already on Requiem for Mayhem. A sparkling addition to the series, so okay, is the tulip guy or cruel? I'm getting a bad vibe from him. No spoilers, I said. If he is anything other than a total gentleman, I'm going to gouge his eyes out. So you are into it. Withholding judgment, when can I see you? Certainly not until you finish an imperial affliction. I enjoyed being coy. Then I had better hang up and start. When can I see you? Certainly not until you finish an imperial affliction. I enjoyed being coy. Then I had better hang up and start reading. You're better, I said, and the line clicked dead without another word. Flirting was new to me, but I liked it. The next morning, I had 20th century American poetry at MCC. This old woman gave a lecture wherein she managed to talk for 90 minutes about Sylvia Plath without ever once quoting a single word of Sylvia Plath. When I got out of class, Mom was idling at the curb in front of the building. Did you just wait here the entire time? I asked as she hurried around to help me haul my cart and tank into the car. No, I picked up the dry cleaning and went to the post office. And then I have a book to read, she said. And I'm the only one who needs to get a life. I smiled and she tried to smile back, but there was something flimsy in it. After a second, I said, wanna go to a movie? Sure, anything you've been wanting to see? Let's just do the thing where we go and see whatever starts next. She closed the door for me and walked around to the driver's side. We drove over to the Castleton Theater and watched a 3D movie about talking jar bills. It was kind of funny actually. When I got out of the movie, I had four text messages from Augustus. Tell me my copy is missing the last 20 pages or something. Hazel Grace, tell me, I have not reached the end of this book. Oh my god, they get married or not? Oh my god, what is this? I guess Anna died and so it just ends. Well, call me when you can. Hope all is okay. So when I got home, I went out into the backyard and sat down on this rusting latticed patio chair and called him. It was a cloudy day, typical Indiana, the kind of weather that boxes you in. Our little backyard was dominated by my childhood swing set, which was looking pretty waterlogged and pathetic. Augustus picked up on the third ring. Hazel Grace, he said. So welcome to the sweet torture of reading an imperial. I stopped when I heard violent sobbing on the other end of the line. Are you okay? I asked. I'm grand, Augustus answered. I am, however, with Isaac, who seems to be decompensating. More wailing, like the death cries of some injured animal. Gus turned his attention to Isaac. Dude, the support group Hazel make this better or worse? Isaac, focus on me. After a minute, I said, can you meet us at my house in, say, 20 minutes? Sure, I said and hung up. If you could drive in a straight line, it would only take like 5 minutes to get from my house to Augusta's house. But you can drive in a straight line because Holiday Park is between us. Even though it was a geographic inconvenience, I really liked Holiday Park. When I was a little kid, I would wade in the White River with my dad, and there was always this great moment when he would throw me up in the air, just toss me away from him, and I would reach out my arms as I flew, and he would reach out his arms, and then we would both see that our arms were not going to touch, and no one was going to catch me, and it would kind of scare the shit out of both of us in the best possible way. And then I would legs flailingly hit the water and then come up for air uninjured, and the current would bring me back to him as I said again, Daddy, again. I pulled into the driveway right next to an old black Toyota Riddim I figured was Isaac's car, cutting the tank behind me. I walked up to the door. I nodded. Gus did answer, just Hazel. He said, nice to meet you. Augustus said I could come over. Yeah, and he and Isaac are in the basement. At which point there was a wail from below that would be Isaac. Gus dad said and shook his head slowly. Cindy had to go for a drive. The sound. He said, anyway, I guess you are wanted downstairs. Can I carry your tank? He asked. No, I'm good. Thanks, though, Mr. Waters. Mark, he said. I was kind of scared to go down there listening to people howl in misery is not among my favorite pastimes, but a Wayne. Hazel Grace, Augustus said as he heard my footsteps. Isaac, Hazel from support group is coming downstairs. Hazel, a gentle reminder. Isaac is in the midst of a psychotic episode. Augustus and Isaac were sitting on the floor in gaming chairs, shaped like lazy Ellis, staring up at a gargantuan television. The screen was split between Isaac's point of view on the left and Augustus on the right. They were soldiers fighting in a bombed-out modern city. I recognized the place from The Price of Dawn. As I approached, I saw nothing unusual, just two guys sitting in the light wash of a huge television, pretending to kill people. Only when I got parallel to them did I see Isaac's face. Tears streamed down his reddened cheeks in a continual flow. His face a taut mask of pain. He stared at the screen, not even glancing at me, and howled, all the while pounding away at his controller. How are you, Hazel? Asked Augustus. I'm okay, I said. Isaac, no response, not even the slightest hint that he was aware of my existence. Just the tears flowing down his face onto his black t-shirt. Augustus glanced away from the screen ever so briefly. You look nice, he said. I was wearing this just past the knees dress I had had forever. Girls think they're only allowed to wear dresses on formal occasions, but I like a woman who says, I'm going over to see a boy who is having a nervous breakdown, a boy whose connection to the sense of sight itself is tenuous, and gosh dang it, I'm going to wear a dress for him. And yet, I said, Isaac owned so much as glanced over at me, too in love with Monica, I suppose, which resulted in a catastrophic shock. Bit of a touchy subject, Augustus explained. Isaac, I don't know about you, but I have the vague sense that we are being outflanked. And then back to me, Isaac and Monica are no longer going concern, but he doesn't want to talk about it. He just wants to cry and play counterinsurgents to the price of them. Fair enough, I said. Isaac, I feel a growing concern about our position. If you agree, head over to that power station and I will cover you. Isaac ran toward a nondescript building while Augustus fired a machine gun wildly in a series of quick bursts running behind him. Anyway, Augustus said to me, it doesn't hurt to talk to him. If you have any sage words of feminine advice, actually think his response is probably appropriate. I said as a burst of gunfire from Isaac killed an enemy who had peeked his head out from behind the burned out husk of a pickup truck. Augustin read at the screen, pain demands to be felt. He said, which was a line from an imperial affliction. You are sure there is no one behind us? He asked Isaac moments later. Tracer bullets started whizzing over their heads. Oh, god damn it, Isaac, Augustus said. I don't mean to criticize you in your moment of great weakness, but you have allowed us to be outflanked, and now there is nothing between the terrorists and the school. Isaac scattered took off, running toward the fire, jigging and jagging down a narrow alleyway. You could go over the bridge and circle back, I said, a tactic I knew about thanks to the you could go over the bridge and circle back. I said, a tactic I knew about thanks to the price of the our size. Sadly, the bridge is already under insurgent control due to questionable strategizing by my bereft cohort. Me, Isaac said, his voice breathing. Me? You were the one who suggested we hole up in the freaking power station. Just turned away from the screen for a second and flashed his crude smile at Isaac. I knew you could talk, buddy, he said. Now let's go save some fictional school children. Together they rounded the alleyway, firing and hiding at the right moments until they reached this one story, single room schoolhouse. They crouched behind a wall across the street and picked off the enemy one by one. Why do they want to get into the school? I asked. They want the kids as hostages, Augustus answered. His shoulders rounded over his controller, slamming buttons, his forearms taut, veins visible. Isaac leaned toward the screen, the controller dancing in his thin fingered hands. Get it, get it, get it, Augustus said. The waves of terrorists continued and they mowed down everyone, their shooting astonishingly precise as it had to be, lest they fire into the school. Grenade! Grenade! Augustus shouted as something arced across the screen, bounced in the doorway of the school, and then rolled against the door. Isaac dropped his controller in disappointment. If the busters can take hostages, they just kill them and claim we did it. Cover me, Augustus said as he jumped out from behind the wall and raced toward the school. Isaac fumbled for his controller and then started firing while the bullets rained down on Augustus, who was shot once and then twice but still ran. Augustus shouting, You can kill Max Mayhem! And with a final flurry of button combinations, he dove onto the grenade, which detonated beneath him. His dismembered body exploded like a geyser, and the screen went red. A throaty voice said, Mission failure. But Augustus seemed to think otherwise as he smiled at his remnants on the screen. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a cigarette, and shoved it between his teeth. Save the kids, he said. Temporarily, I pointed out. All salvation is temporary. Augustus shoot back. I bought them a minute. Maybe there's the minute that buys them an hour, which is the hour that buys them a year. No one's gonna buy them forever. Hail Grace. But my life bought them a minute. And that's not nothing. Whoa, okay, I said, we're just talking about pixels. He shrugged as if he believed the game were really real. Isaac was wailing again. Augustus snapped his head back to him. Another go at the mission, Corporal. Isaac shook his head. No. He leaned over Augustus to look at me and through tightly strung vocal cord said, She didn't want to do it after. She didn't want to dump a blind guy. I She didn't want to dump a blind guy, I say. He nodded. The tears not like tears so much as was a quiet metronome, steady and endless. She said she couldn't handle it, he told me. About to lose my eyesight and she can't handle it. I was thinking about the word handle and all the unholdable things that get handled. I'm sorry, I said. He wiped his stopping face with a sleeve. Behind his glasses, Isaac's eyes seemed so big that everything else on his face kind of disappeared, and it was just this disembodied floating eyes staring at me. One real, one glass. It's unacceptable, he told me. It's totally unacceptable. Well, to be fair, I said, I mean, she really can't handle it. Neither can you, but she doesn't have to handle it, and you do. I kept saying, always too hard today. Always, always, always. And she just kept talking over me and not saying it back. It was like I was already gone. Always was a promise. How can you just break the promise? Sometimes people don't understand the promises they're making when they make them, I say. People don't understand the promises they are making when they make them, I say.